welcome to the Lewiston Tribune podcast. This is episode number 32. I'm Matt Baney, managing editor of the Lewiston Tribune, and I'm joined today by Anthony Kuipers, reporter from the Moscow-Pullman Daily News. Anthony, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for joining. Anthony and I are going to talk about the Kohberger case. Been some hearings recently. We're getting closer to the trial date, and we'll discuss some of the recent rulings in the case as we slowly but steadily move towards the trial in August. But before we begin, a quick reminder that the Lewiston Tribune podcast is available at lmtribune.com, on our YouTube page, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. So please subscribe, and we have a new episode each week. All right. Well, Anthony, you've been covering those hearings, which are taking place at the Ada County Courthouse in Boise. And this week, the judge, Stephen Hippler, made a handful of rulings over the last couple of weeks. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those recent rulings?
Yeah, he's made a number of rulings in the past month, and most of them have to do with what evidence may or may not be used during the upcoming trial. So just a few notable orders. One is he allowed Kohberger's alleged Amazon purchase activity to be allowed into evidence. And so that shows that someone under Kohberger's name purchased a K-bar knife and sheath in March 2022, so just several months before the murders occurred. Kohberger also allegedly purchased a black mask from Dick's Sporting Goods, which matches the description of the suspect inside the house where the crimes occurred. Another piece of evidence is that the prosecution wants to use a traffic stop. Kohberger was stopped for traffic violations a few months before the murders in Moscow. He was stopped by Lewiston County Sheriff's deputy, and that will just show basic information: his name, address, phone number, but it will also show that he was driving the white Elantra that became the alleged suspect vehicle during the investigation. There's been a lot of talk about Kohberger's autism diagnosis, and the defense wants to use that to explain sort of his behaviors and mannerisms, and they also argue that it should be a reason for striking down the death penalty if Kohberger is convicted. But Judge Hippler decided to deny those requests. He said, his autism diagnosis isn't really relevant to this case, and his behaviors and mannerisms in court aren't really relevant either. And then there's also, of course, the text from the surviving roommates, the morning of the murders on November 13th, 2022. And there's also the 911 call to Whitcomb. The judge is allowing the text. He said the text may be admissible in court, but the 911 call, there's certain parts of that he's not comfortable with being admissible. So he's decided to redact some of that conversation, but not all of it, it sounds like. And so that's just some of the notable pieces of evidence from this case.
And it does seem like the last few rulings have mostly benefited the prosecution in the case, right?
It does, yeah. I haven't been keeping exact score, but it does feel like he's sided with the prosecution on the majority of these issues.
Hmm. It does seem like the purchase of the knife and the knife sheath um, could be pretty pivotal evidence. And of course, a disclaimer: we're just discussing this. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens at trial. But what is it that makes the knife and the knife sheath maybe a pivotal piece of evidence?
Yeah, so the knife sheath was found at the crime scene next to one of the victims. The police discovered it, and Kohberger's DNA was allegedly found on that knife sheath. The knife itself hasn't turned up. That's missing, but um, you know, obviously the knife sheath was found, and Kohberger allegedly purchased a similar sheath and knife uh, several months before the murders. So, um, it's pretty obvious why the prosecution wants to use that Amazon purchase activity in their argument.
And that sheath and his DNA being on it, if that's all ends up being what happened, that's probably the most compelling evidence that he would be guilty of this crime, right?
It seems that way. Yeah, I mean, DNA evidence, and obviously both sides have been arguing back and forth about the DNA evidence, but that seems to be the most crucial, if or one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in this case.
One of the things you had in one of your recent stories was that a forensic accountant with the FBI. He's going to be allowed to testify that Kohberger stopped using his debit card after the murders and started, I guess, withdrawing cash and spending that way. What do you think? What does that show?
Yeah, I'm not an investigator, so I don't want to talk too much about that. But it shows that his behavior started to become unusual around the time of the murders. At least unusual for him. It sounded like he often used his debit card, and then he stopped, and then it sounded like he didn't use an ATM until around the time of the murders. So I think the prosecution is trying to show, you know, unusual behavior started around the time that the murders occurred, and they're going to point to that.
Sounds like both sides, the prosecution and the defense, will have experts testify about the logistics of the murders, of killing four people in uh, a space of time. Can you tell us a little about what we might expect from that testimony from the two sides?
Yeah, apparently the defense has an expert, a crime scene analyst who um, will show that uh, the murders had to have been carried out by multiple people with multiple weapons because they happened in a short time frame in a fairly big house. Um, but the prosecution has an Idaho State Police investigator who uh, did trial runs at the house before it was demolished, and I guess he can show that yes, one person could have carried out these crimes in that time span. So we'll see. They're going to argue about that apparently, and the jury will have to decide for themselves. It seems like.
Mm-hmm. One thing that the defense has mentioned is that Bryan Kohberger has an alibi, um, but we haven't heard many details about that alibi. Is that right? Have they given any hints of what that might be?
Yeah, the so far what we know about the alibi is that Kohberger was driving around the time of the murders, but he was not near the crime scene. He was you know somewhere else in Moscow and Pullman, and that he wasn't actually near the house. The issue there is that he so far hasn't provided any witnesses or any evidence to substantiate that, and that's what the prosecution has pointed out. But the judge is still willing to give the defense time to solidify that alibi if they can. So we'll see what happens there.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that also came up in the Thursday hearing this week, a few more details about how the 4 students were discovered and the reaction of the surviving roommates. That kind of there were just a few more details mentioned. Can you tell us about those new details that we heard this week?
Yeah, it's become clear that Xana Kernodle was the first victim that they saw, although it seems that there was confusion about why she was laying on the ground. Maybe she was passed out from drinking, and then of course there was the surviving roommates were online and on their phone in the hours following the murders. They were on social media, they were texting. Apparently they were using Snapchat to try and communicate with their roommates who were at that point who were killed. And then later on in the morning, a couple friends came over and checked out the house, and then that's when they finally decided to call 911.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, Anthony, it does seem like things are moving along at a pretty steady rate. The trial has for a while now been scheduled to start on August 11th in Boise. Does that seem like that's going to happen? It's going to start on time?
Yeah, it seems that Judge Hippler is intent on starting the trial in August. When that time comes, we'll be approaching the 3-year anniversary of the crimes. The prosecution and the defense have both submitted jury questionnaires to help with the jury selection process. Those have been sealed by the court, so we haven't seen those yet. Kohberger's attorneys have complained that they're still catching up on the terabytes of evidence that's involved in this case. And so, but I don't think Judge will be swayed to delay the trial any further. That's sort of my sense. I think he wants to get this started in August.
It does seem that Hippler runs a pretty tight ship. Would you agree with that?
He does. Yeah, it seems that way. When you watch him interact with the attorneys, he likes to keep them on topic, and he'll ask them questions if there's anything he finds confusing or misleading. So yeah, I would say that's a good phrase to use. He runs a tight ship.
Mm-hmm. All right, Anthony, thank you. Thanks for joining us, and interesting new details. And you've been covering this case for a long time. We've all been following it, and I think perhaps everybody is somewhat eager to get to the trial, I imagine, right?
Yeah, it's like I said, this year will be the 3rd anniversary of the crime, so I think a lot of people are looking for closure, and so yeah, I think we're all anxious to get going with the trial.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Anthony, thanks again, and thanks for everybody watching this episode of the Lewiston Tribune podcast. We'll be back again next week with another topic, and until then, have a great day. Bye.